you have to notify in writing denial or approval of the rental unit. And that's a good thing to get used to. Make sure that you notify in writing, either by a letter or by email. I think is the best way. By email, you have an electronic copy of it. I think it's a smart, easy, efficient way to do. Send a copy of the statement of the rental policy. This is that one-page policy of selection that I had you guys create. And there's got to be reasonable modifications. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, you may not be aware of, but there's a law, a federal law, this is not state-driven, a federal law, that if somebody has a disability and they have a service animal, you have to rent, as long as they're financially qualified, you have to rent to that person and they're allowed to have that service animal. Let's say that you had an apartment unit that you didn't allow pets. That was your policy there. And you had somebody that had a disability and they had a service animal, and they applied to your apartment unit, and they were financially sound, you have to let that tenant in if they're have no issues financially with a service dog. The same way if somebody were to come to your apartment unit with a wheelchair, and there's no wheelchair access. This would be a building that would be a little bit older. If they're financially sound and can afford the unit, the ADA Act says that you are responsible. Now, you don't have to build the ramp yourself and pay for that. They have to pay for the ramp, but you've got to allow them to make modifications. Now, upon move out, they have to pay to have that removed if you want that removed. But you've got to follow that ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, because there's some modifications that you might have to come across with your policy there. Okay? Questions with that at all? Do they have something similar to that in Canada? Yeah? Okay. Now, you'll notice this thing here. Let's say you approve the applicant. Get the security deposit. As soon as you approve that applicant, you send out the letter that they're approved, immediately you want to get that security deposit. The reason is because it's a financial commitment by them. Once you get that security deposit, by the way, you might have seen on my rental application and lease, there's language on there that says, if you give me a security deposit for a rental unit and you end up not moving in, that security deposit is non-refundable. What happens is you'll give somebody the approval, they'll say they want the unit, and if you don't collect the security deposit at that point, 3 weeks will pass, they're supposed to move in, it's the 1st, and you call up and say, yep, your unit's all ready, you're going to move in today. You know what, we found another unit. So they're not going to be moving in. Meanwhile, that unit has been sitting there for 3 weeks without a tenant in it. Remember, it's kind of like a seat on an airplane. When that plane takes off, that airline company loses the ability to get money for that particular seat on that particular flight in that particular day forever. It's gone. The same way happens in real estate. So make sure that you get that security deposit, make it non-refundable if they don't move in. Once you have the security deposit, make sure you establish the date of move-in. A lot of people like to move in not on the 1st of the month. If they're looking for an apartment, there's usually a reason why, okay? Usually a reason why. You might say, well, what if they move in on the 15th or the 12th or the 10th? No problem. You just prorate their rent. When you prorate somebody's rent, you'll take, let's just say the rent is $750. You'll divide that by 30. Say there's 30 days in a month. You'll divide that by 30. And if they're moving in on the 12th, that means there's 18 days left in the month. You'll take that number, times it by 18, and that's their prorated rent. Okay? That's typically how that's handled. I think it's important to provide tenants with a welcome sheet. I think it's also important on the day of move-in to go over that lease with the tenants. Go over each line item with the lease, make sure they read it, make sure they understand it, Make sure they initial each page. I think it's very important that they do that. That proves that they've read it and they understand those items on the lease. Very important. We have a question?
John, before you finish up this section, can you highlight maybe the half a dozen key differences between dealing with the whole tenant situation of a single-family home versus, or a duplex single-family versus an apartment?
Like the differences in tenants?
No, the half a dozen key differences that you have to do differently in them, like where there's stark differences in this whole tenant.
Well, strangely enough, I don't think there's a lot of differences between the two when you start. I think every single tenant, be it a single-family house or a 24-unit apartment building, you should do these things that I'm talking about. Now, the start date of a single-family house, you might be going through things like walking through the garage, talking to them about storage of chemicals in the garage or gasoline containers, or the fact that they've got to cut the grass there as opposed to cutting the grass at an apartment unit, changing the water softener out, adding salt, stuff like that. You're going to go through the once-over with the house probably in more detail than the apartment units. But other than the physical things like that, I think the management of the lease and how you manage that property is very much the same thing. I think one of the other major differences is that I would like to instill in really all my tenants that, it's a little bit of a sense of pride. With single-family houses, I almost like to use the word home ownership pride. With the apartment units, I like to use the word community. We have a sense of community here. We watch out for one another. Other than those differences, I try to keep everything on a system. Well, your lease is going to be very, very similar. I would take that lease and give it to the homeowner, because the homeowner definitely has the opportunity to bug the neighbor next door, or to bug the neighbor across the street with loud music, parties, so on and so forth. So there's not too much different language. If your language is stronger for the apartment building, I would just use that for the house, because it's strong language anyway. You don't want to lack. You don't want to get pull back at all just because they're in a single-family house. I think you make it just as strict. Okay? Yes?
If you have a property manager who's doing all this for you, is this something they would typically do, or is this an extra service? Is that included in like that 1 month advance payment?
Yeah,
And
this is a lot.
do you have to negotiate that with them? I want you to do all these things.
Yeah, this is a lot of what they're going to do. The reason I'm telling you this is because there's no way that you can hire a good property manager if you don't know what good property management is yourself. So I think that's important to know. But yes, I would absolutely be negotiating that fee. If they're charging a 1 month fee for them to place a tenant to you, I would definitely negotiate that down. I think there is some marketing cost and some effort that goes into that. They deserve to be compensated, but sometimes their fee is a little bit exorbitant.
Yeah, I'm just thinking
Except when my company's doing it. I'm just kidding.
I'm just thinking that, providing with a welcome sheet, that could be a standard thing, but then all of a sudden you got to get somebody to explain the lease to them and go over it. Could take an hour.
I would do that anyway. I would have the property manager do that anyway. It's well worth it. Yep. It's well worth it. I'd also have that property manager, based on your contract, if he's managing or she's managing your single-family house or apartment units, once the walkthrough's been done, like the cleaning, the maintenance has all been done, have them go through with a video camera. Have them go through with digital pictures and take pictures. As a judge once told me, the more evidence you have against the tenant, the better off you are as an owner. So I would make sure that that would be implemented in that as well. If you're going to pay that property manager a half a month's rent to market that unit, make sure you're getting your money's worth out of that. Yes?
You just got to the part that they move in and then sign the lease. Do they have access to the lease before that?
Do they have to what?
Access to the lease.
Access to the lease?
Yeah, they want to see the lease beforehand.
Sure, if they want to see the lease, absolutely. You should be able to send them a copy of that lease. And if you're managing the property yourself, That's why I like the iPad and tablets in general. I'm not promoting Apple, but I like the iPad because I can take my PDF on my lease as a lease and I can email it right from my iPad right to them immediately. So if they want to see that early, which they should, I think you could definitely do that on an instant basis.
And have you been ever asked for any item to be changed on the lease, or?
I have. Typically, I don't like to change the lease. Once it's written, and an attorney put that together for a reason. I will change term dates and other things like that. Or if you've got somebody in the armed services, they're not allowed to sign a long-term lease. So typically, I'll go a month-to-month scenario with them. Or if there's something else that's reasonable that the prospective tenant is asking about, by all means, I'm going to do that. Like a lot of times we'll get a single parent that comes in that their kid doesn't really live with them, but they're going to be there about half the time or maybe months in the summer. So they're asking, hey, am I allowed to, do I put him on the lease or not? I'm real flexible with stuff like that. Okay? Good question, though. Okay, establish the date of move-in, provide the tenants with a welcome sheet. What does this welcome sheet have in it? Number one, you've gone over the lease line item by line item. They've initialed each page, so on and so forth. The welcome sheet is going to tell them things like, again, where they pay their rent, how they pay their rent, nearest shopping or highways or transportation, where their kids are picked up on the school bus, if that's appropriate there, what the utility numbers are for gas, electric, water, trash, if that's appropriate, that type of thing, and any other information that would be relevant to that tenant just moving into that property. I also, and this is something that we haven't really talked about, but I think this should be in your lease, and I also think it should be on the welcome sheet. You should recommend to that tenant that they get renter's insurance. Renter's insurance is going to cover their personal contents in that apartment unit. My liability insurance that I have on the house and or the apartment building will not cover their personal contents. Renter's insurance is fairly inexpensive. For a 2-bedroom apartment, a Class B apartment, the average items that a tenant has in there, you could get that covered for well under $200 for the whole year, well under $200. It would be probably a wise investment for them. And again, I would have something like that in my lease that you're recommending that they get that because your insurance does not cover their personal contents. So again, in the meeting, you're reviewing the lease, the general area, and the rules. I think, again, you want to pull out the move-in, move-out form. You're going to be filling this thing out. Now, notice the sequence here. I talked about earlier the importance of getting the security deposit when you approve them. But more importantly, I think it's important to get the prorated rents, then hand the keys, just like I was mentioning yesterday. If you go to Starbucks, they always make you, or Tim Hortons, sorry, let's go to Tim Hortons. You go to Tim Hortons and you go to the drive-up, you give them the money, and then they give you the coffee. I've never been to a Tim Hortons or well, I've been to Tim Hortons a couple times, but I've never been to a Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, McDonald's, Burger King, you name it, where you get the food first and then you give them the money. The same system is applied here. You get the prorated rents, and then you get the keys. This is what happens. On the day of move-in, because there's so many things going on, they forget their checkbook, they forget cash, they forget all these things and say, hey, I'll come back later today or come back tomorrow. I can't give you the keys until I get the rent. Once you give me the rent, then I can give you the keys. But I can't give you the keys without the rent. So make sure you put that system in place, or your property manager does. Yes?
I thought the property manager had a good idea that what they do is they, instead of getting prorated rent, they get a full month's rent, and it's the second month that's prorated. So that they get a full month, which takes them to, let's say, the 21st of the following month, and the next month's check is a prorated amount, so that there's no, they get more money up front.
You know, that's a pretty good idea. I'm going to write that one down. That's a pretty good idea. You learn something every day. See that? I like that.